Welcome to our explainer. The American Civil War finally ended in 1865. But, the battle for what America was actually going to be, that was just getting started. So today, we're going to dive into Reconstruction, that chaotic, hopeful, and ultimately heartbreaking time that tried to answer a huge question. What does it really mean to be a United States? So the cannons fall silent, right? But that doesn't mean peace has arrived, not by a long shot. The war answered one big question: the country would stay together. But it opened up a ton of new ones that were maybe even harder to solve. And really, this was the question hanging over everything. How do you rebuild? And we're not just talking about buildings and bridges. We're talking about a whole society. How do you bring 4 million newly freed people into a nation that had only ever known them as property? And maybe the biggest question of all, how do you even define freedom? To really get a handle on the solutions they tried, you first have to understand just how bad things were. So let's start with the devastation, and we'll look at a state like Virginia, which saw more fighting than pretty much anywhere else. Yeah, this quote, it just says it all, doesn't it? The end of the fighting didn't just flip a switch to peace and harmony. It left behind this deep, raw anger and a landscape that was literally in ruins. The bitterness was just as real as the rubble. The economy was just gone, wiped out. For starters, the entire financial system had collapsed. Banks just shut their doors, and people's life savings vanished along with them. And even if you'd stuffed cash under your mattress, it wouldn't have mattered. Confederate money, the very currency that had kept the Southern economy going for 4 years, was now just useless paper. Imagine your entire fortune turning into trash overnight. And it wasn't just the money. The physical damage was staggering. The basic things a society needs to function, railroads, bridges, farms, they were destroyed. The South wasn't just broke, it was physically broken. But beyond all that rubble and worthless money, there's the human story. And it's a big one. 4 million people. 4 million newly freed African Americans who had won their freedom, but now had to figure out what that meant in a world that had only ever seen them one way. Just think about this. For so many of these millions of people, the very first act of freedom wasn't celebrating. It was a desperate, heartbreaking search, trying to find the husband, the wife, the child, the parent who had been sold away years before. Okay, so you have this total crisis. Physical, financial, human. What do you even do? Where do you start? What was the first real attempt to fix this mess? Well, the first big answer came from the federal government, and it was something pretty radical for the time: the Freedmen's Bureau. This was a brand new idea, a government agency created to help manage a massive social crisis and give aid directly to formerly enslaved people. And look, the Bureau was trying to do everything. It provided food, shelter, medical care. It even helped people find jobs. But the one thing that truly changed the game, the most revolutionary thing they did, was provide schools. And this picture, this says so much. You have to remember, before the war, in most of the South, it was illegal to teach an enslaved person how to read and write. So now, education wasn't just learning, it was a powerful symbol of freedom itself. But, of course, this kind of progress, it didn't go unanswered. For every step forward, there was a powerful, organized push backward. The backlash was fast and it was fierce. See, as the old Confederate states started putting together new governments, often run by the very same people who led the rebellion, they started passing these laws called Black Codes. Their goal was pretty simple and pretty grim: control black labor and create a system that looked as much like slavery as they could get away with. Just look at this list. These weren't small things. They were designed to control every single part of a person's life. You couldn't own land, you couldn't move freely, you couldn't even choose your own job. It really makes you ask, if all this is true, what does freedom even mean? So this move by the Southern states, it didn't go unnoticed. The fight escalated, moving from the state level right up to Washington, D.C., into the halls of Congress itself. And Congress's response was, whoa, it was huge. In just 5 years, they passed 3 amendments that completely reshaped the Constitution. The 13th officially ended slavery. The 14th made anyone born here a citizen and promised everyone equal protection under the law. And the 15th gave black men the right to vote. This was basically a second American Revolution, at least on paper. Okay, so we've got these incredible new rights written into the Constitution, but having rights on paper and being able to live them out are two very different things, especially when it comes to money and land. So, because very few formerly enslaved people ever got the land they were promised, most had no choice but to enter this new system. It was called sharecropping. And on the surface, it sounded okay. You rent some land, you work for yourself, but in practice, it often turned into a trap. And this is the trap. Let's just walk through how it worked. You'd start the year by renting everything, land, tools, seeds, on credit from the landowner. At the end of the year, you'd pay him back with a big share of your crop. But the landowner set the prices, and they were often so low that your share wasn't enough to cover your debt. So you'd start the next year even deeper in the hole.
And don't think this was some small-scale thing. Look at this number from Virginia. By 1880, sharecropping dominated the Southern economy. It became the new reality for millions, trapping families in a cycle of debt for generations and choking off the economic freedom that's supposed to be central to the American dream.
And that's really the story of Reconstruction, isn't it? It was this unfinished revolution. It put these amazing promises of equality into the Constitution, but it failed to follow through and make them a reality on the ground. And that set the stage for the next 100 years of struggle for civil rights. It leaves us with a pretty tough question. What happens when a country makes a promise it isn't ready to keep? And what echoes of that fight do you think we can still hear today?